Ladies and gentlemen, we are now starting. Julius will be presenting ICAR 5, a 5-item public domain cognitive test.
Thank you. And sorry for the delay, but hopefully everything will be fine now. So, ICAR 5 almost sounds like a new Apple product, but it is not. I promise you, it will be much better. That's too many. Okay, there's a sneak peek there. Okay, so first, hopefully, the ICAR 5. Hopefully, it's going to be the solutions to some problems. First, some problems with other IQ tests is affordability, like Rachel mentioned the Bachelor Adult Intelligence Skill version 4. If you want the basic kit of that, they'll cost you approximately $1,200 bucks. That's a lot of money if you want to do many different IQ tests or studies comparing intelligence to other subjects. The other problem is time. They often include many items, and they can take half an hour or an hour to complete to get a very precise measure, right? But if we just want to compare one subject to intelligence, then you don't need a very precise measure. You just need something that is good enough. Good enough to see if someone is about average or above or below average. So some sort of a mental yardstick if you want to measure like how tall someone is. You can do it with a laser precision to get the how tall they are in millimeters or nanometers. But if we just want to see if someone is a NBA player, average height or midget, we can just use a yardstick. So hopefully the ICAR 5 will be a mental yardstick. And the last part is modifiability. As mentioned before, with the device, it's copyrighted, so it blocks any sort of modifiability, like changing items or just translations. Like if I want a test in Danish, for example. And also, the ICAR 5, it's based on the work from the ICAR project. The ICAR project is the International Cognitive Ability Resource Test Project. It includes 60 items, and it has been well tested and verified. Also, the ICAR have not been made for or tested on children yet. So hopefully this test tested on children will contribute something new. And it also gives back to the scientific community, which is creating some sort of goodwill for myself and for others. These are noble reasons, but of course the real reason is not that. It's a little bit more selfish. I needed I needed myself a short free test, and I didn't know of any, and I asked Emil also if he knew of any. He didn't, so I guess we have to make one and validate it ourselves. So again, it's based on the ICAR project, and further there's a test or a variation of it, the ICAR 16. 16 symbolizes that it has 16 items. We started off there, but if we want a shorter test than the 16 one, then we need to cut off some items. And one way to do it is use a evolutionary algorithm to pick out the best 5 items out of the 16 items from the ICAR 16. If you use a evolutionary algorithm, you might get a fast way to sort through the best combination. But unfortunately, as illustrated here to show the landscape, if you have a arbitrary starting point, like down in this valley, and the computer evolves and modifies the test and see, okay, is there a higher or lower correlation with these 5 items compared to the 16 item version? If the correlation increases, then we can move up the hill and we get a better test, or we get a better 5 item composition. Unfortunately, there's some problems with this because there's a local maximum like point A or point C, then we will never discover the best possible solution, which would be point B. Luckily, if we only need to choose 5 out of 16 items, then we can just test all of them. So without any duplicates, there will be about 4,000 combinations. And in the ICAR 16, there are 4 different types of items. There's the verbal reasoning item, there's the letter, number, alphanumeric items, that's a metric reasoning items, and the 3D rotation dice items. If we want at least one of each, which combination would be the best? The one we chose was not the very best, but it was ranked number 27 out of the almost 4,000. And the correlation with the ICAR 16 is 0.8, about 0.8. Now why didn't we choose rank number 1? Well, the reason why is the best combination has 2 of the items that takes the longest time to complete. And remember, we also wanted one that was fast to complete. So we had to pick the one where there was 2 verbal reasoning items instead, because those are faster to complete. And the difference between rank 1 and 27 in their correlation with the ICAR 16 is not that bad. So we could get away with it, because as long as it's good enough, then it's fine. And you can see here the landscape of the different combinations. So if we take this combination instead of the one right next to it, it doesn't really make a difference. So it's fine. So the participants, we got a little over 200 pupils from 2 different schools to test on, from 11 different classes, and the grade level was between 6th and 10th grade. And you can see the age distribution here, so about 12 almost to year 18. The administration, we used just pen and paper and told them they had no time limit, mostly just to not stress them and make sure that they had a more optimal testing environment. But usually they took between 5 and 15 minutes to complete the test. And also from a pilot run, we had to explain question number 3. The one with the alphanumerical questions in there, because the pupils, they didn't understand the question. So we were in a dilemma. So we could A, explain the question so everybody would get it, or we could just say, well, we don't explain it, and then just let the brighter students or the brighter pupils figure it out themselves and solve the question. But if we want to measure their mental ability, well, we got to make sure that they at least know what they're supposed to do, and then we can see how good they are at it. And the results, here are the correlation matrix. As you can see above the diagonal, you get the latent correlations, and below diagonal you get above the diagonal you get the Pearson correlation, and below you get the latent correlations. Those are the correlations as if we did not dichotomize the results as either right or false, we would get a continuous scale and see if that would help with the correlation between the different items. And as expected, all of the correlations are positive, but some barely so. So the scoring methods, we could use the Pearson correlation between the different sums, simple sums, or just the standard factor analysis, or the item response theory factor analysis. But since they're all near 1, we can just use the most simple method, which is the simple sums, where we just say you get 1 point for correct answer, or you get 0 points for incorrect answer. And unfortunately, I in my presentation put it in where I needed to click, so it shows the correlation with how many points they get by age, which is behind this figure, but you would just have to imagine that it is as expected. The older the students are, the more points they get. But we can also see by grade that the higher grade level they are, on average, they get more points. They get more correct answers. And that is also as expected. Now, there's one that's a little bit odd, like the 10th grade. Why do they score lower than the previous grades? Well, that is also as expected, but for those who are not familiar with the Danish school system, the 10th grade is not mandatory. That is mostly reserved for those who need an extra year, either because their grades are not good enough to go to high school, or they haven't decided what they want to do yet. So that's also expected that they're not as good as the previous years. Now, to item performance theory analysis. So this is the landscape of how good the different items in the test are at discriminating between the students. And it's a little bit funny that the LM58, that's a number, the alphanumerical question, that is actually the best one at discriminating between the pupils. The one where we explicitly explain what they're supposed to do. There's a bit of a surprise, but it's a pleasant surprise. But then again, we got the matrix reasoning one, which is not very good at discriminating between anyone. So if we should repeat this and do it again, we can swap it out for a better or another question. Hopefully to get more coverage over here to discriminate between the average to not so bright pupils. So in conclusion, we were able to construct an abbreviated version of the ICAR test that shows the expected relation between age and grade level. So, just to summarize, is it the solution to many problems? Well, affordability, it's free. We have uploaded the results, the source material, and our calculations and methods to open science framework, so it's available to everyone. Time, well, yes, it is short to take, again, between 5 to 15 minutes, depending on how bright you are. And modifiability, yes, no copyright, no anything. You are free to translate it into another language or add or subtract items as you please. But of course, then you would need to validate that yourselves. But you're free to do so if you want to. And for future studies, as mentioned before, we explore the matrix reasoning item because it doesn't really discriminate between any of the pupils. And also possibly we can swallow the verbal reasoning items because they were, not as good as some of the other items at discriminating. Also examine the possible effect of explaining the items. It was a bit surprising the one where we explicitly told them what to do, or not what to do, but how to solve the question. It would be interesting to see if that also increases the discrimination rate for some of the other questions. It will also be a good idea in future studies to set a time limit instead of saying you can just turn in your paper whenever you're done. But that would probably also be a good idea if you hand out, instead of using pen and paper, for them to have to do it on the computer, because then you can also check how long each student take on each item. So you can verify that indeed the different items take different time, and there's some who consume more time than they are better at discriminating at. And also try to use GPA or possibly others as criteria variables. And the reason why we didn't use GPA in this study was the schools were concerned about us using their GPA, so we weren't allowed to get those. So it was for privacy reasons. But hopefully someone else will be able to get those in the future. So that's all. Thank you.
Question for Julius? Yes, go ahead.
Sorry, did you run the test without explaining the question that you explained?
If I did the test?
I mean, yeah, just to see how accurate that was.
Well, no, for the pilot one, for the very first class we tested on, all the pupils asked what's the purpose of the question, or how to fix it. So at the time we need to make a choice, and we just chose to explain to them. We didn't.
So you didn't see what the result would be by leaving it to them.
You didn't have a control condition which
No.
explanations were given.
No, unfortunately not. But that's what I hope that in the future it will be interesting to examine the effects of that. To have one group have it explained to those, and another group not.
Okay, thank you. Other questions? Did you compare it against some simple processing things? Ian Deary has, I think, a 7-minute IQ test, if I recall. I put down a note for myself that I need to check it. And he told me in private conversations, for aging, the best measure is symbol digit. Yeah, it's better than a brain scan. So 90 seconds, symbol digit.
Okay.
Something which you might compare or put this, because I think this has great merit and it's interesting. I think if you could run it again on a bigger sample, and we could try out some of the supposedly fast tests. I was thinking also, AJ, what's the 10-item vocabulary that's in the general family
Word
survey
sum.
in America? Word sum.
Word sum.
Word sum. You've come across word sum?
Not in
Okay.
not in Danish.
Not in
That's-
Danish.
Yeah,
Okay.
that is a word, if I recall correctly, some linguists they
Yeah.
are trying to do a
Well, let's-
word sum for
Let's
adults.
take ICARS into English,
Yeah.
and then we can try and link it with word sum.
Well, ICA is already in English. Part of
It
this
is.
was also to
Okay.
test if it works on Danish pupils.
Okay, so we could look at ICARS in English, look at it against word sum, and possibly look at it against a processing speed test like symbol digit, which at 90 seconds I think is the most cost-effective intervention yet available for anyone.
Yeah.
What is symbol digit?
I say it's not digit symbol, but symbol digit. It's the coding task. But instead of your writing the symbol, which is unusual for you, you're shown symbols and you write down numeral, which of course is very useful. So you get rid of a potential source of variance, error variance. Now it's interesting, your educational thing about how to do the item gives you better discriminability. And I would argue, because you have taken off some of the fluff that attaches to the question, and you've got the pure question, because it's explained.
Yeah.
Right? So always what I think we're trying to do is get rid of adventitious problems to get to the core of the problem.
Yeah.
All right. My last point is, I don't know, there's work done, and I've forgotten the authors, on the anytime, everywhere test. He sets out a couple set out what one would require of an intelligence test, that it can be done to any organism at any time, anywhere. It could be interrupted at any stage and still provide useful information. All right? So that's the ideal we're trying to look for. So definitely I think this needs to be computerized if it gives you advantages. Pencil and paper is in fact one of the best techniques, because having been trained at school, I think it's still trained at school, it becomes a non-problem. Everyone can use it very quickly. But the anytime test suggests that even if we have an interrupted test, we should be able to deduce from the early bits what the other bits would likely to be. Right? It's like a Bayesian approach to testing. I mean, this is an ideal rather than an actuality. Though in the British school system we have a cognitive assessment test, and there's 7 or 8 commercial varieties of it, and that is doing the same sort of task. And that is there in the school system now, though usually not accessed. but by requesting it from the school, you can get it, the cognitive assessment, usually from about age 13 onwards. So there's lots of data there.
Can I add on the point for the use of pen and paper or use computers instead? Actually, we're using this ICAR 5 in a different study where we're looking at stereotype accuracy, where we are hiring a survey company to collect some data for us, and we provide them the questions. So among the questions for stereotype accuracies, we also want to see, okay, is there any relations to their intelligence, or they're better at guessing, right? And then we attach this, so they can look at it from the computer, their smartphone, their tablet, whatever. So we have already tried
Multi-platform.
Yeah.
Multi-platform. AJ.
Just a quick comment. Very famous scientist here in the UK who spoke to me privately, and I'm sure would prefer to remain anonymous, told me his attitude towards copyrighted tests, and that is sue me. He just uses them. It's only if you're making a profit that anybody will actually go after you, even though they have the legal right to do so.
Yeah.
But
And he just ignores all this
a
copyright.
friend of mine who I can name, Professor Nick McManus, decided that he would do something which experimental psychologists never do, which is try to do some assessments of subjects. And so he got from the 5-factor personality test the 2 highest loading items, plus one other. He made a 10-item test and started handing it out, and then he got harassment from the people who were, now, harassment he probably should have said sue me, but he withdrew his very, very effective and quick 5-factor personality test. You just go to the matrix, find on the factors the 2 highest loading, and that's
You may get harassment, but they're not going to pay a
They're
lawyer
not,
to go
yes.
after you if you don't have any money, and none of us have any money.
Yeah, that's right. So we're unsuable. Sue us. Woodley.
Like, I don't know if this is the same test, but there's something called TIPI, the 10-item personality test, which has been developed using the same protocol. So,
Okay.
but the thing is, it's used to measure the big 5. Now, you can't measure the big 5 using 2 items per dimension, but you can measure the GFP using 10 items. So it's a very good short-form measure of the GFP, as AJ will tell you, because he's using it in all his work.
I'm a GFP fancier. Please, go ahead.
The one comment I had 2 years ago in discussion was it'd be nice to have reaction time standardized and computerized, and with the reports it was real cheap, and especially these time series issues, as somebody commented, was Victorian smarter, or even was my parents smarter than a better way to phrase it, would my children be smarter than me, because we're both computerized, and if we had at least standardized reaction times, we could go back up to 20 years and see whether my sons were smarter than I was, and our generation changed.
We should love to talk to you about reactions. We're in an open session now with some little alterations which I'll tell you about in a moment. The great problem, I'm now going to speak for Woodley, which is always a strange situation, then he's going to speak for himself, is we thought all the guys in the past, by which we mean 1960s, had excellent data on reaction times.
Yes.
And what they say is a lot of that depended on the sort of equipment they were using, and we really got screwed on that. But I think reaction time is interesting. Again, from the Deary data for aging, that although intelligence predicts lifespan, your quality of life, your health, and so on, about 1/3 of that variance can be removed by a simple reaction time test. Now, Jensen would have predicted it was choice reaction time. I, having read Jensen, would have thought it was choice reaction time. It was simple reaction time. Have I provoked you enough, Michael?
You have, yes. But it's interesting, actually, you should bring up the issue of reaction times, because, as you know, I got into a spot of bother in 2013 for making...
You gained notoriety which was richly deserved and stirred up by me. Carry on.
Yes, for noticing that Victorian populations scored, well, they had faster scores on average than modern populations on measures of simple reaction time. But one of the interesting things is it turns out that Galton's equipment, by virtue of its mechanical nature, and the instantaneous transmission of the force of the depression of the key to the arresting of the pendulum, meant that he was probably measuring reaction time at closer to the absolute physiological limits than modern equipment is, which is confounded with computer processing lags and hardware lags and variable signal luminances and whether the signal is extrafoveal in size or not. But the interesting thing is, I was hammered, absolutely hammered. I had the most commented on paper ever published in Intelligence. Yulia Dodonova and Yuri Dodonov, the Russian team, hammered me. They even rebuilt Galton's pendulum apparatus in sort of miniature form, and they said, you know, all this stuff, when you take it out of when you correct for this and you correct for that, it makes the trend go away. Well, we applied their corrections to a more strictly selected and matched set of subsets, and we actually found the trend got stronger, but the variation around the trend got lesser. But all of this is in the past now, because Guy Madison and I have a paper which is under review. It's just been accepted pending revisions with human frontiers in human neuroscience, where we've actually shown, if you look at Swedes measured using the same reaction time tests across a 25, 30 year span?
27 years.
That's right. And you don't correct for age, right? These are Swedes of different age. The secular slowing across this population is so strong, and this is controlling, by the way, for attrition effects, which we can do using this sample. There's a very nice way of connecting it with a big database so we can get data on attrition, estimate the effect of attrition. Controlling for that, the secular slowing in this sample is so strong that it exists even in the absence of controls for age. If you put the age-related slowing in, it potentiates the trend even further.
Does that control for immigrant fractions or?
No immigrants in this
No.
population, none
Okay.
whatsoever. You,
No.
you can use a name. You can actually look at the names
The
in
name.
this, and there's only like 3
The
Arabs or
proper
something in
Swedes.
there. Yeah.
Proper Swedes.
Yeah.
Okay. Interesting. When's that coming out?
Guy.
Well, any week.
Any
Yeah,
week? Any
shortly,
week.
yeah.
And so you will let us know, those of us who are in the blogging penumbra.
But
who are trying- yes.
just very briefly, I don't want to monopolise this, but very briefly, we found the same thing in Ian's data, and we pointed it out to Ian.
Uh-huh.
And we did a paper in the Mankind Quarterly with Guy and Bruce
Yeah.
Charlton, where we actually we were able to correct the longitudinal slowing using the actual participant data.
Mm.
And we showed that once you correct for this, you get a secular slowing, which amounts to, guess what, about 1.8 points of IQ per decade. So it's that rough ballpark.
1.8.
1.8, yes, that's what we got per decade of slowing. If you
Guy?
convert the reaction time into its IQ equivalent.
Okay. Guy?
I should add that the measurement problems are massive with
Yes.
using computers, and particularly different computers in people's homes.
Yeah.
So we had to put a great deal of work into trying to compensate for the worst variabilities, and I had to shave off, I think, 40 milliseconds on average, up to 80, 90 milliseconds for some combinations of browsers and
I find on my
operating
own reaction time data
systems.
that I get much better scores when not using it was my previous computer, but when I had a wireless mouse,
Mhm.
I was doing much better.
Mm.
And I was first of all very pleased to be doing better, but then I thought, you know, the variabilities according to the equipment must be so poor. We ought to go back to gravity, which hasn't been
Yes,
fiddled
the ruler
with
drop.
very much.
Yes,
All right?
yes.
It's a we need a Galton equivalent, you know, catch the falling ruler, etc. Catch the falling knife, we'd give it a certain element of anxiety.
Pre-preparedness.
But yes, a better predictor.
Standalone hardware.
Yes, absolute standalone hardware, and all you'd have to compensate for were changes in the value of gravity, which we now know exist, but I think there are smaller magnitudes than the perturbations of computers.
Temperature and humidity, perhaps.
Not for gravity, not for gravity.
I was thinking of
I was thinking of air
bearings and
resistance,
things.
air resistance,
Bearings.
barometrics, that sort of thing.
Yeah, I wonder. Ed?
TV shows have been doing this where you drop a brill and
Yes.
someone can catch it. So if you need to motivate people, here's
Yes.
the technology.
Yes, okay, okay.